They say real estate is the only thing they aren't making more of. That's why in a town like Franklin, Tennessee, people will treat a 4-inch strip of dirt like it's the Gaza Strip. I'm Jim. I'm 52. I work in corporate compliance, which is a fancy way of saying I spend 40 hours a week making sure people follow the rules. And I live in a house I bought 20 years ago. My pride and joy isn't the house itself, though. It's the lot. It's an irregular shape, a long flag lot that gives me a massive front lawn that stays green even in the dead of a Tennessee July. But 3 weeks ago, I woke up to a sound that no homeowner ever wants to hear. A heavy-duty diesel engine idling right outside my bedroom window at 6 a.m. I pulled back the curtains, and my heart didn't just sink, it turned into a lead weight. There was a bobcat loader tearing a long, ugly brown scar right through the edge of my front lawn. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a planned invasion. And I knew exactly who was driving the invasion. It was Greg. Greg lives in the house that sits behind me. He's got a tiny driveway that's always been a tight squeeze for his two oversized SUVs. For years, he's been eyeing the corner of my property, a 15-foot wide strip of grass that leads out to the main road. I walked outside in my bathrobe holding a lukewarm cup of coffee. Greg was standing there, wearing a reflective vest, which he loves a good costume, and a pair of wraparound sunglasses that screamed, "I'm about to be a problem." "Morning, Jim," he shouted over the roar of the machinery. "Finally getting that expansion done. It's going to look great for the neighborhood property values, don't you think?" I looked at the bobcat, which was currently dumping a bucket of gravel exactly 10 feet onto my side of the property line. "Greg," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "that gravel is on my grass. That's my land." He didn't even flinch. He just gave me this big, booming laugh, the kind of laugh guys like him use to avoid actually listening. "Oh, Jimbo, don't be like that. We checked the old fence posts. This is the shared easement area. I'm doing us both a favor by paving it, right? No mud?" I looked at the shared easement he was talking about. It didn't exist. I knew my deed, I knew my plat map, but I also knew Greg. If I fought him now, he'd just stop the work and spend the next 6 months harassing me with frivolous HOA complaints. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I realized that if I let him pour the concrete, he wasn't just making a mistake, he'd be building me a $12,000 gift. "Pave away, Greg," I said with a small nod. "Just make sure it's level. I'd hate for the water to pool on my side." He grinned, thinking he'd successfully bullied old Jim again. "You got it, buddy. Top-tier 4,000 PSI mix. It'll be dry by Friday." As I walked back inside, I wasn't thinking about the grass. I was thinking about the Tennessee property encroachment laws and a very specific legal concept called self-help redress. To understand the level of satisfaction I was aiming for, you have to understand the history of Greg. Greg moved in 4 years ago, and since day one, he's treated our shared property line like a suggestion. He's the guy who lets his dog poop on your lawn and then says, "Nature's fertilizer, right?" He's the guy who hosts cigar and bourbon nights on his deck with a subwoofer that makes my kitchen windows rattle at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Last year, Greg tried to tell me I couldn't park my boat, a 22-foot center console, in my own side yard because it was an eyesore that blocked his view of the sunset. Mind you, my boat was behind a 6-foot privacy fence. He actually complained to the city, saying I was violating a visual easement. The city inspector came out, laughed in Greg's face, and told me the boat was perfectly legal. Greg didn't take the loss well. He spent the next month shining his high-powered LED security floodlights directly into my bedroom window every night until I threatened him with a harassment suit. So when Greg decided to pave a driveway over my lawn, he wasn't just looking for more parking space.
He was trying to reclaim the power he'd felt he'd lost during the boat incident. He wanted to show the neighborhood that he was the alpha of the cul-de-sac. On Wednesday, the cement mixer arrived. I watched from my garage as they poured a beautiful, smooth, 40-foot-long concrete pad that connected Greg's narrow driveway to the main road by cutting a huge triangle right across my front lawn. It was professional work. Greg was out there the whole time, supervising with a beer in his hand, telling the workers to smooth out that edge for Jimbo. On Thursday, while the concrete was in its critical curing phase, I stayed inside. I didn't want to give him any reason to suspect that I was anything other than a defeated neighbor who had accepted his fate. But inside, I was working. I spent the morning at the Williamson County Clerk's office. I didn't just want a map, I wanted the certified title report. I found the original 1978 deed for my property. It was beautiful. Not only did it confirm that I owned the land Greg just paved, but it also contained a very specific clause regarding the utility and access easements. There was an easement on my property, but it was for the city's water line, not for the neighbor's Chevy Tahoe. In fact, the deed specifically stated that no permanent structures were to be built on that 15-foot strip without written consent from the owner. That was me. I was the owner, and I hadn't signed a thing. Then I looked up Greg's property. This was the smoking gun. Greg had bought his house as a fixer-upper from a foreclosure auction. He probably never had a formal survey done. He was likely relying on a 20-year-old fence line that had been installed incorrectly by the previous owners. In Tennessee, we have a law regarding adverse possession, but it takes 7 years of open and notorious use under a color of title to claim someone else's land. Greg had only been here for 4. Next, I checked the building permits. To pour a driveway extension in our town, you need a land disturbance permit if you're covering more than 500 square feet. Greg's new driveway to nowhere was easily 800 square feet. I called the permit office. "Hi, I'm calling to check the status of a permit for a driveway pour at Greg's address." "One moment. Sir, we don't have any active or pending permits for that address. Is work currently being performed?" "Oh, the concrete is already dry," I said, smiling at my reflection in the window. I didn't call the city yet. That would be too easy. I wanted this to be a lesson that Greg would feel in his bank account for the next decade. I met with Sarah, a real estate attorney who specializes in property disputes. Sarah is the kind of woman who wears pearls but has the eyes of a shark. I showed her the photos of the bobcat on my lawn. I showed her the dry concrete. I showed her my certified deed. "He paved over your lawn?" Sarah asked, leaning back in her leather chair. "Without a survey? Without a permit? And without your permission?" "Exactly," I said. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Jim, this is what we call trespassing and permanent encroachment. Since the structure is now fixed to your land, it technically becomes your property. But it's an illegal structure. You have 2 options. You can sue him to remove it, which will cost him about $5,000 in legal fees and another $10,000 in demolition. Or—" "I like or," I said. "Or," Sarah continued, "you can exercise your right to quiet enjoyment of your own property. Since the concrete is on your land, you can use it. You can build on it. You can even fence it off. He can't use it for access because he doesn't have a prescriptive easement yet." "What if I park my boat on it?" I asked. Sarah's eyes lit up. "If you park your boat on your own land, even if that land happens to have your neighbor's concrete on it, he can't do a thing. In fact, if he touches your boat to move it,
That's grand theft or tampering with a motor vehicle. And if he tries to drive over your lawn to get around you, that's fresh trespassing. I shook Sarah's hand, paid her retainer, and went to the hardware store. It was time for malicious compliance.
Friday morning in Franklin is usually quiet, save for the sound of leaf blowers and the occasional distant rumble of a lawnmower. But this Friday, the air felt different. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I was the one holding the lightning rod. The concrete had been curing for 48 hours. It was a beautiful pale gray slab, smooth as a pool table, cutting a sharp, arrogant triangle right across the corner of my yard where my prize-winning fescue used to be. Greg even went the extra mile. He'd hired a guy to come out and spray seal it so it had that glossy, high-end look. I saw him out there around 8 a.m., standing on the edge of the new pad with a cup of coffee, looking like he'd just conquered a small nation. He even did a little ceremonial test walk across it, nodding to himself. He didn't see me watching from the darkened window of my garage. I waited until 9:30 a.m. That's when the neighborhood is at its busiest. Moms heading to the grocery store, retirees walking their labs, and most importantly, Greg's wife Brenda heading for her tennis match. I went out to the side of my house, unlatched the heavy steel gates of my privacy fence, and hopped into my truck. I've been backing trailers since I was 16 years old. My boat, a 22-foot Sea Hunt with a T-top and a dual-axle trailer, is a big girl. She weighs about 4,500 pounds dry. I hitched her up, put the truck in reverse, and began the slow, deliberate crawl towards Greg's brand-new driveway extension. The sound of the tires hitting that fresh concrete was the most satisfying thing I've heard in a decade. Crunch, thud. I didn't park it off to the side. I didn't share the space. I backed that trailer right into the center of the slab, angled it so that the outboard motor was hanging inches away from Greg's actual property line, and dropped the jack stand. I unhitched the truck, locked the trailer hitch with a heavy-duty master lock, and walked towards my front porch. I didn't have to wait long. Greg was out of his front door before I even reached my top step. He was wearing his Weekend Warrior workout gear, but his face was anything but relaxed. It was a deep, concerning shade of purple. "Jim, what the hell are you doing?" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the boat. "Move that thing, now! I'm expecting a delivery for the backyard project." I stopped, turned around, and looked at him like he was talking about the weather. "Morning, Greg. Moving what? My boat?" "You parked it on my new driveway, Jim. Don't play games with me. I spent $12,000 on that concrete. You're going to crack it with that weight." I took a slow step down toward him, making sure to stay firmly on my side of the line, or rather, on the concrete that was sitting on my land. "Well, Greg, that's the thing," I said, my voice low and steady. "I checked my deed yesterday, and then I had a little chat with a surveyor. It turns out this driveway you built is actually a very expensive patio for my boat. See, this land, all 40 feet of this slab, technically belongs to me." Greg laughed. It was that forced, desperate laugh of a man who knows he's in trouble but thinks he can still bluster his way out. "You're full of it, Jim. The fence line—" "The fence was put in by the guy who lived here in 1994, Greg. He was a drunk and he was lazy. He put the fence 5 feet inside the line to avoid a tree root. You didn't check the iron pins. I did." I pulled a folded piece of paper out of my pocket. It was a copy of the plat map with the surveyor's fresh markings highlighted in yellow. I didn't hand it to him. I just held it up.
If you touch that boat, I'm calling the cops for tampering with a motor vehicle. And if you try to drive your Tahoe over my grass to get around it, that's trespassing. I've already got the cameras recording." I pointed to the small blinking light of a new Ring camera I'd mounted on the corner of my house that morning. Greg's jaw worked up and down, but no sound came out. He looked at the boat. He looked at the concrete. He looked at the camera. Then he did exactly what I expected. He reached for his phone. "I'm calling the HOA. This is an eyesore. You can't park a boat in the front yard. It's a violation." I just smiled. "Go ahead, Greg. Call him. I'll wait."
About 2 hours later, a white SUV with the Neighborhood Association logo pulled up. Out stepped Mr. Henderson. Bill Henderson is the kind of guy who carries a ruler to measure the height of your grass. He's usually my biggest headache, but today he was my guest of honor. Greg was already there, practically vibrating with excitement. "Bill, look at this! Jim parked this giant boat right in the middle of the driveway extension. It's a visual nuisance, it's a safety hazard." Bill looked at the boat, then he looked at the concrete, then he looked at me. "Jim, what's the story here? You know the bylaws say no boats in the driveway for more than 24 hours. "You're right, Bill," I said, walking over. "But here's the kicker. This isn't a driveway. This is an illegal encroachment on my property. Greg here poured this without a permit and without a survey. Technically, he's abandoned a structure on my land." I handed Bill the survey and a copy of the city's permit search I printed out. Bill Henderson might be a stickler for grass height, but he hates one thing more than dandelions: people who bypass the HOA Architectural Review Board. "Greg," said Bill, his voice turning cold, "did you submit plans for this pour?" "Well, no, I thought since it was just a driveway extension." "And did you get a city permit?" Bill asked, nudging the concrete with his shoe. I was going to." "You didn't," Bill snapped. "And according to this survey, you've built a permanent structure on my lot. That's a Tier 1 violation. Not only are you going to be fined by the HOA every day this concrete stays here, but I'm legally obligated to report this unpermitted work to the city." Greg's face went from purple to a ghostly white. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a neighborly out. I didn't give him one. 10 minutes after Bill left, Greg's phone rang. It was the city. Apparently, Bill moves fast when he's annoyed. By 3 p.m., a city inspector, a guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, arrived and slapped a bright red "Stop Work" violation sticker right on Greg's front door.
For the next week, the boat stayed exactly where it was. Greg had to park his SUVs on the street, which meant he got 2 tickets from the local police for parking too close to a fire hydrant. Brenda, his wife, stopped speaking to him. I could hear them arguing through the walls of their house, something about a vacation fund being spent on a useless piece of rock. On Wednesday, I got a knock on my door. It was Greg. He didn't have his reflective vest on. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. "Jim," he said, staring at his shoes, "the city gave me 30 days to remediate the encroachment. They're charging me $200 a day in fines until it's gone." "Sounds expensive," I said. "The demolition company wants $6,000 to jackhammer it out and haul away the debris," he groaned. "Plus, I have to pay to re-sod your lawn." "Jim, man, can't I just pay you for the land? I'll give you $5,000. It's a win-win." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Greg, let's talk compliance. You spent $12,000 building this. You're looking at $6,000 to tear it down, plus fines, plus my legal fees, which are currently sitting at about $2,000 for Sarah's time." "2,000? She's a good lawyer, Greg. Now here's the deal. I don't want your 5 grand. I want my yard back, but I also want that boat parking space for the rest of the season. So here's what's going to happen. I laid out the terms. Greg would pay my legal fees in full. Greg would sign a notarized document admitting the encroachment so there would never be a prescriptive easement claim later. Greg would pay for the demolition, but he would do it on my schedule. I wanted the boat there for another month while my real storage unit was being renovated. Greg looked like he wanted to cry. He'd spent nearly $20,000 to build a driveway he couldn't use, only to have to pay another $6,000 to destroy it, all while paying for my lawyer.
A month later, the demolition crew arrived. It was a crisp October morning. The sound of the jackhammers was deafening. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. I sat on my porch, enjoying the vibration. I watched as the glossy, sealed concrete, Greg's alpha statement, was reduced to gray rubble and loaded into a dumpster. Greg stood in his garage, watching his money being shoveled into a truck. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. Once the concrete was gone, the crew brought in fresh topsoil and high-end fescue sod. Within 2 weeks, my front lawn was a seamless, vibrant green again. You'd never even know a suburban war had been fought there. But the neighborhood knows. Now, when Greg drives his SUVs into his tiny, narrow driveway, he does it very, very carefully. He doesn't even let his tires touch the curb of my grass. When we see each other, he doesn't give me that booming laugh anymore. He just gives me a quick, nervous nod and hurries inside. I still park my boat in the side yard, behind my legal fence, on my legal land. And every time I look at that corner of the lawn, I don't just see grass. I see the importance of a good survey, a sharp lawyer, and the absolute satisfaction of watching an entitled neighbor realize that flexible property lines always snap back eventually. So, I'll leave you with this. In the suburbs, you can be a good neighbor or you can be a flexible neighbor. But if you decide to be the latter, just remember one thing. Concrete is hard, but the law is harder. And my boat? She's never had a better place to rest.